Arcane is a literary analysis goldmine in the sense that everyone and everything kind of parallels each other. This obviously creates a general sense of narrative harmony, but also each of the parallels specifically has something unique to say. And there's one particular that I noticed that I wanted to figure out and get to the bottom of. Jinx and Cait are both foils and parallels. They have both a lot in common, and those commonalities also draw our eye to how very different they are, kind of prompting us to ask the question, if they're so similar, how and why did they end up so different? There's an innate drama to seeing two opposed people conflict, knowing that parts of themselves are reflected in the other. But it's not just what's similar, it's how. So, let's kick it right off. Off the bat, let's start with the superficial things. Both Caitlyn and Jinx have blue hair. Now, this is maybe more of a minor point, but nonetheless noteworthy because not everyone on this show has colored hair. We could go into symbolism here, with Cait having the darker shade and Jinx the lighter shade, despite the inverse in terms of surface level morality, but also sometimes things can just be aesthetics, and I think there's juicier stuff to dig into. Anyway, these two are also mega linked by the plot, and their choices impact each other from the very beginning, even before they're aware of it. Jace, Vi, Powder, and Cait all find themselves on different sides of a door in a scene that arguably becomes the inciting incident for the whole show. There are parallels and symmetrical relationships between everyone involved here, and that includes Powder and Cait, being led into a new world by their rebellious companion, Jace and Vi. And the inciting incident for Act 2 is that Jinx steals the crystal, which is what sparks Cait's journey to the Undercity as she tries to get it back. And then finally, after the end of Season 1, Jinx becomes Cait's main target, for understandable reasons. And also, both Cait and Jinx are gun users. This is where a lot of the meat of the meaning comes through. So, let's ask the important questions. First of all, why guns? Guns are precision weapons and distance weapons. You don't make direct contact with your opponent. Cait and Jinx are both shown to be excellent shots, but even here, this is in unique ways. Cait, for her part, is generally very focused and shoots with incredible control. Cait looks right at her target, arguably the way you should. Jinx, on the other hand, is interesting because she either wields guns with complete unhinged chaos or with uncanny, almost detached precision. In both cases for Jinx, though, whether she's careful or not, there seems to be a degree of instinct to the way she shoots. She's not thinking, she's not evaluating, she's acting. So, Cait seems to calculate her shots with her mind, Jinx with her gut. So, what's going on here? Like I said, there's a level of detachment with guns to a degree. You're not making physical contact with your target as if you were punching them, for example. But it's the kind of detachment that matters here, and both of these characters approach it very differently. So let's look at the specifics of exactly what kind of detachment we're talking about. There's something to be said then about Jinx either looking away from, dissociating from, or distorting the violence she commits in some way. Violence is both the source of her strength and of her inner turmoil. Violence is the thing that has ruined her family, her life, her mental state. And when I think about Jinx looking away, I also think about how, as kids on the bridge, Vi told her to cover her eyes so as to not see the death and destruction around them. So Jinx is in this really unique and sad position where she's both this massive enactor of violence, but also often really disconnected from it in some way. However, there are also some times where Jinx does stare directly at her victims, but in these cases she usually loses focus soon after. Or, for example, during her fight with Echo, the entire scene is stylized as kids playing paintball. This obviously could just be for our benefit, to highlight the tragedy of the scene, but it could also be part of Jinx's misaligned perception. We do know from seeing Jinx's point of view that her focus on her targets is sometimes clouded by actual hallucinations and episodes of psychosis. So even in those times that she makes direct visual contact with a target, it's not a guarantee that she's seeing things as they truly are. And in contrast, we get a lot of emphasis on how Caitlyn looks directly at violence, both literally and figuratively. First, she does this out of professional commitment, curiosity, and then out of an ideological duty when she sees what's going on between the two cities. And we could argue that Cait's pragmatism is itself a form of detachment, because Cait looks at her targets more directly, sure, but her experiences with violence and its effects are comparatively fewer and less intense, at least until the end of Season 1. And we already know from trailers that Caitlyn staring down the barrel into the reality of violence has the potential to wrench her apart in her own way. The only time we see Jinx stare and focus at a shot completely unimpeded is as Powder while playing games with her siblings. This is another scene that they have in common because Cait also has a scene dedicated to her marksmanship as a kid. Probably for the best, both Cait and Powder start out shooting not at people, but at targets in some kind of competition. So this is violence in theory, depersonalized. Cait is competing with Grayson, who arguably lets her win. Powder competes with Milo, who she easily beats. And again, the details here are important. Powder beats him in both speed and accuracy, but Cait wins not because Grayson missed, but because she was faster than her. So, if Grayson slowed down to let Cait win, it's because Cait was taking a longer time to line up her shot.
You held your shot, I saw you.
Once again, emphasizing the differences within the similarities. Two sharpshooters, one calculated, one instinctive. And of course, there are also major significant differences that tell us something about the characters. The implication here is that Cait has been trained to shoot, and this is the culmination of her lessons. Whereas Powder hasn't gone through similar training. She's just dicking around with her siblings, and is very competent without any official instruction. So this begs the question, why doesn't anyone just give Powder a gun? It could be because they simply don't have one, although they probably have the means to get one. But it's not just about raw skill, it's the fact that Powder declares herself to not be a fighter. She can shoot, but if she were in a real conflict situation, she wouldn't have the presence of mind to use it. In actual fights, she either freezes or runs. Whereas throwing a bomb, even one that could cause serious harm, requires little accuracy, just a throw in the right direction. And while Grayson asks Cait what she shoots for, no one asks this of Powder. And in a way, they kind of don't have to. We know Powder's attempts at creating violence are, at least in part, attempts to prove her competency to her sister, to help, to protect, to contribute. There's a much more straightforward explanation for why these Undercity kids fight, because their survival is predicated on it in a way that an upper-class person in Piltover would probably never experience. Powder also doesn't win anything except getting to make a face at Milo, but Cait even wins a trophy, which pointedly she couldn't care less about. Cait comes up short and is rewarded anyway. Powder succeeds, but isn't rewarded because there's no structure for that, and because it doesn't matter. Success for her would be actually being useful in a real fight, and so far she hasn't been able to. There's an air of dignity, of class and status that is of course completely absent from any of Powder's scenes. When Cait shoots, there's an emphasis on the elegance of the bullet flying, and the fact that the bullet is even engraved. Fighting in theory, as opposed to fighting as a tool to protect yourself and those you care about. Marksmanship as a way to show off, as a trophy to display on a mantle. Violence in practice isn't pretty or dignified. And there's bits of this in their scenes as well. Cait's targets were just shapes, whereas Powder's had drawings of people. It's also important to note the kinds of weapons that they use. In terms of guns, Jinx generally uses a handgun, whereas Caitlyn uses a rifle. Besides the associations with class, rifles generally as more upper class, a rifle by design requires two hands, more control and support. And while both Jinx and Cait are shooters, Jinx also has a much wider arsenal. She also has bombs, which she starts out using when she's still Powder. Bombs are also distance weapons, but embodying chaos and maximum damage rather than precision. So the kinds of weapons they use and the way they wield them contextualizes both of their relationships with violence. Violence is the language of this entire world. Jinx, the version of Powder that emerges, is forged from violence. and it's Jinx's acts that bring Cait into the Undercity. The acts of this person, a kid very much like her, who continually reenacts the very thing that harmed her. So between the two of them, Jinx is obviously exposed to and carries out more violence, but again, either dissociates from it or loses herself in it. By contrast, violence in practice is a much newer thing to Cait, potentially one explanation for why she's able to stare it down so much more easily. The way Jinx wields violence is an evolved self-protection mechanism. So, what about Cait's violence? Well, first, it's defensive. We see her save Vi with a precision shot. Then, later, in a scene I love, she trades her rifle for medicine, symbolically swapping a tool for violence, defensive or offensive, for one of healing.
For me, knowing how to handle this weapon means being able to protect people.
Cait also wants to protect people, but it goes deeper. She's ultimately a thinker. She analyzes. I think Cait wants to understand the world around her, and shoots in hopes of not having to shoot anymore. Because when we talk about Cait's shooting, there's a huge, obvious detail here, which is Cait actually doesn't fire her gun that often in the entire season. By the middle of Act 2, she gets rid of her rifle and only holds a gun again when Jinx is threatening her. Which brings us to their general motivations, which, once again, both overlap and contrast. Both of them are problem solvers in unique ways. We see Jinx working specifically up close on mechanical projects, whereas Cait, for her part, tries, at least, to analyze the big picture view of the working parts of the city. Small scale, large scale. Both Cait and Jinx have big hearts that they follow almost to their detriment. Both are motivated by a deep desire to prove themselves and are willing to break rules to do so. Powder goes to help her siblings when she's told to stay put, and Cait goes along with Jace in Act 1, as well as later disobeys direct orders from her superiors when she's on tent guard duty. Both of them are misfits in some way, desiring to fight, to be more involved, to see a world that they're held back from. Both start from a place of naivete and innocence curated by someone else. Cait is held back by loving parents, Powder by a parentified older sister. Both see themselves as kept from being able to make real change.
She'd do anything to keep me from seeing the real world.
What I said...
I want to fight. I can help.
But the differences, as usual, are also pretty significant. Both of them are sheltered, but for very different reasons. Cait is shielded by privilege, but Powder comes from struggle and is shielded from it by Vi almost delaying the inevitable. And the biggest difference in this case is simply when this is all happening to them. Cait is kind of loosely on the journey that Powder had as a kid. She wants to experience and contribute to the world, and is initially unable to do so in the way that she wants. But for Powder, violence becomes very real at a much younger age. While Cait has to go out of her way to seek out the real world of the Undercity, it finds Powder a lot more easily and a lot sooner. And a lot of the contrasts also show up in an exceptionally interesting way, in that they slot really well into the mind-body dichotomy that's peppered throughout the show.
We confine the physical body, yet the mind is still free. I do love a good conundrum.
Cait's mind has been free, but her body, for most of her adulthood, has been restricted. To some degree, the opposite is true for Jinx, who has been able to move freely, but has been trapped in her mind. And this goes even further. The Undercity itself tends to be associated with the body and with instinct. Shimmer, the curse and power source for the Undercity, transforms a person from the inside. This is compared with Tech, which is associated with Piltover, which strengthens the body from the outside. Precision shooting, then, requires a harmony between the mind and the body, the aim, the focus, the steady hands. Jinx's shooting has a great degree of instinct to it, coming from the intuitive reactions of her body to the world around her. And while Cait has this too, her precision is unique from Jinx, in that it feels more of a product of focus, of training. We might also describe this as the difference between conscious and subconscious action, which also makes sense. Fear and desperation, both more common in the Undercity, bring out subconscious survival behaviors. It's all interconnected. So, in this sense, Jinx and Cait are poised to be the sort of avatars for the future of their respective worlds. They're both incredibly determined people and two powerful forces for change. And as people who are so similar and also so different, this prompts a few questions about the potential for reconciliation between these worlds. Firstly, how much of these differences are innate and unchangeable, as opposed to how much is due to their environments and experiences? And to a degree, does it even matter? If it comes from the environment, how is that any less real? And secondly, the question of which matters more, similarities or differences. Because Cait and Jinx are similar, sure, but so is everyone else. By virtue of being human, we all have similarities with each other, including with people we perceive as super distinct from us. So the question becomes, to what extent do similar traits and even shared love matter? Do Cait and Jinx's similarities and shared love for Vi open a new path towards understanding? Or is this even more a cause for more conflict? These are questions with open-ended answers in general, and especially so as we're on the verge of seeing the second half of this story. So what do these parallels tell us? To what end are they used? Arcane in general puts a huge emphasis on duality. There's duality within individuals, within Piltover and Zon, as much as there is between the two of them. Ultimately, dialectics are about synthesis, as in opposites and contrasts draw our eye to the qualities of these contrasts, to prompt us to look for the truth, if we can call it that, in pieces of both, right? In these two characters and their relationships with Vi, we see potential paths. So actually, I lied, because it is kind of like their hair. Similarities invite us to look closer at the qualities of what we're talking about, aka both of them have blue hair, but they have different shades. So, in how Jinx and Cait represent two potential future paths, their parallels speak to a shared humanity, but they also emphasize that similar traits don't necessarily mean unity and harmony. Because the idea isn't just, oh, Zonites, Piltover people are all monsters, or we're all just basically the same, so let's hold hands and bask in our shared humanity. Differences exist, and they matter, wherever they come from. As for example, Cait's sheltering was built on the exact same systems that endangered Powder. These systems aren't separate, they necessarily work together. And pretty significantly, both characters are Vi's closest relationships in the show. Jinx and Cait both deeply care for Vi in their own ways, and very much represent the two forces pulling at her in the middle. The imagery of the show makes this clear as well. Vi and Jinx are shown in a yin-yang position in the opening, and then Vi and Cait are shown later in a similar position. Savika's dialogue even makes this explicit.
She's with some girl enforcer. Guess she replaced you.
Narratively and emotionally, Vi is caught between loyalty to Jinx and Cait, which are presented as mutually exclusive, either-or choices. And knowing what we know about them, this builds a tragic element of Cait and Jinx essentially fighting a shadow version of themselves. There's dramatic irony in us knowing how similar they are, and these characters themselves not knowing, and even if they did know, maybe it wouldn't be enough. The tragedy of seeing the possibility that maybe it didn't have to be either-or. Maybe in another, simpler, kinder world, Powder was never Jinx in the first place, and she and Cait bonded over the things they have in common. Maybe in this idealized world, they didn't even have weapons in common because there's no reason to shoot at all. But it's innately tragic to consider, as Arcane's Season 1 final lyric puts it, what could have been. Makes us wonder if baby Cait and Powder were in the same room, in this better world, what would it look like? And in thinking about this, emphasizes how much this is not that world. This is so far past that world. And in this story, unfortunately, it's likely that these relationships with Vi may actually be mutually exclusive. Or also, who knows where they're going to go. With Season 2 around the corner, I expect these themes will be expanded on a ton, and the intersection of Cait and Jinx's choices are primed to be the core of the second season. I will undoubtedly have something to say about it when Season 2 drops, so consider this something of a part 1 of 2 of an analysis. Thank you so much for watching, and if seeing my disorganized notes for this video morph into a proper script sounds fun and interesting, check out my Patreon, where I post notes and my in-progress scripts and other fun stuff so you can see the process behind the scenes. That's patreon.com/5x5takes. As always, thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for your endless and beautiful support.